All right, everyone, it's funny to watch like corporations and people be woke because here's something that people need to realize. Being woke is basically just being a bigot, but not being smart enough to realize it. Let's look at different bigots. First, you've got the honest bigot, which is like, someone with the Nazi tattoo on their forehead and, the Confederate flag on their coal-rolling pickup who basically spends all day telling jokes about gay people or whatever. They're being open, they're being honest and acknowledging, hey, I've got this ingrained dislike or disdain or distrust or hate of some other group for some reason. They're not trying to hide it. They're fully aware of the fact that they've got that view. They just don't see anything wrong with it. But the woke crowd are just as bigoted. It's just that they're not open and honest with themselves about the fact that they have bigotry. Now, here's a posit for you. And I base this on my interaction with people that on the outside, the facade, usually white, by the way, and liberal. They're anti-racist, anti-bigoted. They'd say, oh my God, it's fucking sexist, fucking right-wingers and stuff, fucking traditionalist, moralist piece of shit. I've interacted with these people in private, interpersonally and online, and I can tell you they are more bigoted than the average population. I've spoken with people who, on the outside, they're like Confederate flag-waving hicks and fucking rednecks and stuff. They are considerably less bigoted and intolerant. Mostly it boils down to they want to be able to tell jokes about like blacks or gay people, but really they don't care. Like if a black family moved in next door, they just shrug their shoulders. They don't give a shit. The liberal family, meanwhile, while on the outside they would be like stony-faced and dealing with it, on the inside they'd be like, oh shit, there goes the neighborhood. I'm telling you, I've interacted with enough people to tell you there's a huge correlation on this. The people who are loudest about, they're projecting. The people who are loudest about hating racism, hating the right wing, they're the most bigoted. Again, thousands and thousands of people in my sample size. Not many people can say the same because they just don't interact with as many people in an interpersonal manner. I've noticed, because I have a large audience, people are more open with me. I used to have like people sending me messages on YouTube asking me philosophical questions I couldn't even answer. I mean, I felt like a therapist sometimes. Overall, again, people on not necessarily the left, but people who put up that front about disliking bigotry are the most bigoted. Woke is just bigotry without the honesty. That's all it is. Really, in order to have the wokeness thing, you have to start thinking about people as separate anyway. You have to group them separately, black and white, tall and short, male and female, and so you have to crack people apart into smaller groups and create those differentiations in order for wokeness to have any real meaning whatsoever. Now, I'm not arguing for colorblindness. What I am arguing is that when people give that huge artificial importance to the differences between people, and their mind is incapable of grouping them together in a larger sense, for instance, that I would say that that's an underlying basis of potential bigotry. For instance, let's look at the United States. You can think about people as, well, you're a black American, you're a white American, you're a hyphenated American. Or you can simply get past that and say, well, we're Americans, we're sort of all in this together. You can give that civic system more importance, and that glues society together. This is why in many social senses, at the dawn of the Cold War, prior to roughly the mid to late 60s at least, for the first 20 years of that period, and certainly even before that, since roughly the post-Civil War period, I'm talking about the United States in this one, so the civic identity was held up on a pedestal and given artificial importance, and it glued people together. Now, this doesn't mean there wasn't violence or crime or serial killers or race riots or lynchings or anything. Those all happened. But there was an overarching glue that held society together. In World War II, everyone congeals together. It's no longer particularly meaningful, well, you're Jewish and you're a goyim, you're black and you're white, you're 6 feet tall and he's a dwarf. Those differentiations between people, at the very least, were put to the back burner because they realized that there was a more existential crisis to deal with. The reason why we have wokeness and all of these other problems with left-wing bigotry today is because there's no external thing to focus on to congeal a civic identity. So before, in the Cold War, it's, well, we might get nuked by these Soviets. They might wipe us off the face of the earth. We're kind of in this together. In the 60s, that sort of starts to fall apart, and it goes back and forth between how congealed society was at different times. The problem we have now is essentially decadence. In the post-Soviet era, there's no external foe really to focus on. And so except in times of significant national crisis, and then only because of systemic propaganda, there's no glue for society anymore. It's not held together in the civic sense anymore because there's the us versus them becomes internalized because there's nothing external to have a them with. Before it was us, the US, or the West, versus them, the commies, the Soviets. That was the importance. When that falls apart, the us versus them that necessarily exists goes inside, and it's, well, black versus white, rich versus poor, and so things begin to get dicey. Now, we've had periods, again, the 60s, the Civil War, and so forth, minor cases of that, and the Gilded Era, arguably. We've had cases like this before. We always end up emerging from them. The problem is we're now in a world with significant numbers of nuclear powers, that's number one, in which, hackers alone, people with enough malevolent tech knowledge, could theoretically bring down a large economy, at least temporarily, in an era where the world is crowded and filled with crazy shit. Disease certainly more prevalent when you've got higher population density potentially, got a pandemic right now and so forth. This can become a big problem. But wokeness, really, we need to start seeing it as a symptom of a sick society that is beginning to devour itself. Now, again, the black pillars will say, well, that's because America's falling. The experiment's over, we've failed, we're going to balkanize or any stupid shit like that. It's not going to happen. But it will cause problems and great misery to people and could fundamentally be used by the malevolent, by the evildoers, the corporatists and billionaires and so forth. By the entrenched political powers. The wokeness, which is a symbol and symptom of the decadence of society, could be utilized to denigrate liberty. It could be used to attempt to permanently overhaul things in favor of global tyranny and things like that. This is why we must defeat wokeism. See it for what it is. It's grandstanding by corporations, and it's projection by people who feel guilty about their own inevitable internalized bigotry. That's really what it's about. Woke people are bigots. In fact, they're open about it as long as they're talking about whites or straight people or males. As long as they're talking about a perceived majority, they don't even register it as being bigotry. They'll focus on how it's impossible to be bigoted unless you're part of that empowered majority. In other words, if you're empowered, well, then if you're like a politician or, a multinational billionaire or something, okay, those people have privilege. Saying that to some random poor white person doesn't really register with them either. I find it funny because I have a feeling that the average woke liberal white individual is just they don't know what it's like to be poor. So they think of privilege. They think, well, I was raised in the middle class in the suburbs, so every person who looks like me must have been raised like me. Well, no, they're, white people living in dilapidated trailers in big cities and dirt-floored hovels out in the middle of nowhere in Appalachia and shit like that, but you don't know that because you've never been there. You've never lived that sort of lifestyle experience. And so their wokeness, they project it off on other people because of their own internalized guilt. They feel guilty because they look at their 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, suburban quarter-acre lot, and they look at how they've got the barbecue grill and a nice car and stuff, and they compare that to the ghetto, and what they see there is people who don't look like them. So they project off that difference as though it is universal, as though both of those dipoles are universal and both groups of people are all-encompassing and homogenized. Well, clearly not, but, that's, again, it's their internalized bigotry. That's about all. Peace out.